So, as this slide says, I'm Clive Thompson, and I write about how technology affects the way we think, the way we learn things, the way we share them with other people, the way we muse on them ourselves. Now, what I'm here to talk about today, though, is, we all have a lot of technology around us. We all use a lot of technology. We all have computers in our pockets, I'm assuming almost everyone here. And one of the things that often interests me is this question of all the people who made this stuff, where did they come from? What inspired them to become the hackers and the tweakers and the makers that create all this software that we use? And this is a really interesting civic issue now because, as Tricia said in her terrific talk this morning, when you have a conscripted and limited number of people that are making the software, you can wind up with stuff that doesn't really reflect the broad base of use you're actually going to see in everyday life. So for my next book, I've actually been interviewing programmers to find out, and UX designers to find out where did they come from, what gave them the sense that they could be empowered enough to jump in and do this stuff, to build the digital reality that we live in. So everyone who I've asked this question has told me there was some moment they had when they got exposed to a system that was open that let them dive in and get their hands dirty. And if they're around my age in their 40s, it was often this machine, the Commodore 64. This was the first personal computer, first computer you could buy that you could sit at home, plug into your TV, and you could make it do things. And this was an incredibly catalytic feeling for a generation of kids who did this. The adults had no idea what was going on. They thought this was just a weird little toy. They didn't get it. They didn't figure out what their kids were doing. But what their kids were doing was learning how to speak to that machine using BASIC, which was the first ever language that reached out into the mass audience and allowed kids to learn how to do things, how to make this machine play games, how to make this machine play music, how to make it, do little databases and chatbots. And so it was this incredibly exciting feeling for them that they could actually do this stuff, that no one was overlooking what they were doing, and they could share tips and tricks with their friends. And they also sort of invented the internet, right? Because they got BBSs, modems, and they started talking to each other. And this was the first time that they got that thrill of being able to use a machine to transform the way they communicate. They could talk to other people. They could talk to machines that were bent on thermonuclear destruction, as in the case of the movie War Games. And this was a really interesting feeling for them. That's how that generation of people started to think about building the internet world that we live in today. Now, one of the things that was interesting was there was always open-ended systems whenever kids were around. About a few years later, after the Commodore 64, you started seeing these sort of DOS games. Now, the DOS games were interesting because you could sort of reach inside the code and mess with them and fix them and do interesting things. In this case, this is Castle Wolfenstein, one of the first ever 3D games. Well, a bunch of kids realized they could get inside and change the code and reskin it to turn it into Castle Smurfenstein, because they said they found Smurfs actually scarier than Second World War Nazis. And so this type of hacking was the next sort of open box where kids started playing around with stuff. And again, it was stuff that the parents thought was stupid and ridiculous. They didn't understand what was going on. But over and over again, as I talked to these UX designers and hackers, they all talked about what their wave was, because a few years after this stuff, you had HTML and the internet that came along. And that was, again, a sort of an open, exciting system, because you could just view source, you could look at what was inside the web page, and you could go, hey, I can actually do this. I could learn how to speak this language. I could make my incredibly ugly fan page to the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And it was all ugly and weird and stupid, which is, again, why it sort of got ignored by all the adults who were looking at this stuff. Now, this really created the generation of hackers that we see now today. Everything you're using today, all the stuff on these phones, all the switches that run that stuff, all the web server software that runs it, was built by folks who got a chance to dive in and feel empowered to do this stuff. But there's this sort of interesting problem we've run into now, which is that a lot of the systems have become much more closed down in the last 5 or 10 years. Like, you take a look at something like the iPad or the iPhone, it's a terrific thing to use, but it's not a very open, hackable system. It doesn't even have a file system you can look at. And so over and over again, I talk to sort of older people in their 30s and 40s who are hackers and makers, and they say they're really worried about the fact that they don't think there's as many environments for kids to dive in and have that catalytic feeling of doing this crazy DIY stuff, of making things, of breaking them and causing mischief in software. And so they have this question. They sort of say, what is going to be the next environment that's like the Commodore 64 or like HTML that encourages kids to get in and dive in and do stuff? Well, there have been these sort of top-down initiatives, these attempts, by authorities to try and figure out ways to encourage kids to sort of develop this hacker-like mentality. This is a software language made at MIT. It's called Scratch, and it's designed to introduce kids to sort of the fun of messing around with software. It's pretty good. It's a lot of fun. I've used it myself. My kids have used it. And it's inspired a lot of kids to do some interesting game making. There's in the US, there's these initiatives called, Hour of Code or Day of Code, where they try and say, hey, let's all do a little bit of programming today and get some sense of what we could do with these crazy machines. And I think these are sort of worthy initiatives, but they're all very hierarchical and top-down. Right? They're all an attempt to create a cultural change from above. And you can never really create cultural change from above. It always just happens in an organic way when the right environment comes along. When something comes along that gives young people that sense of, oh, this is a crazy, open, weird system that I can do almost anything in. Now, I think that next environment is going to be Minecraft, the game. I'm actually very happy to be here in Sweden talking about Minecraft because this is where Minecraft came from, right? Last year, I wrote a story for the New York Times Magazine about Minecraft and its impact on kids and their culture. And never before have children been interested in what I'm actually writing about in my journalism. But when I told the kids at my kids' school that I was going to actually meet the people that make Minecraft, they were electric in their response, and they all had specific instructions that they wanted me to convey to the team. Here, this is broken. I want this changed in this update. It's incredibly narrow specs. They understood the software incredibly well. So Minecraft is a very open and hackable system. If you haven't seen Minecraft, let me give you a little sense of what it looks like. This is my son Zev, who's in the audience today. He's just building something. And as you can see, you're sort of just laying blocks down. He's out here in the woods, and he's building a house. And it has this very fun feeling of just being able to very quickly architect something, putting the roof on the house here, you can go inside the house when it's done, and here he is building some sort of furniture and stuff. And at the very end, creating a little sort of coffee table so you can sit down and chill out in your Minecraft house. And so, this sense of almost Lego-like placing of blocks is the first big lure of the game. And you'll often see people showing off these ridiculous creations they've done. Like they've done an entire version of Disney World. I don't know if you've recognized this. This is from Game of Thrones. We're like 7 miles in the air here. This is massive. This took these people weeks and weeks and weeks to make. So there's this very audacious sort of Lego-like feeling with the game. But you can also do artwork. This is a little more of my kid's stuff. This is my son Zev. He likes to do pixel art. So he sort of has fun designing stuff. That's a mushroom from Mario. That's his guitar. So in one sense, this is the surface appeal of the game. You can make things, you can click things together. It's like infinite Legos. Everyone gets that. But there's a lot of weird layers to this game, as I discovered when I started talking to the dozens and dozens of kids that used it. For example, one of the things that's inside this game is something called redstone. Now, this is one of the first times in my life I'm ever actually going to use a pointer to point at things. So redstone is these little red lines here. And what they do is that's like wiring inside the game. You can use it to sort of send energy from this block to these blocks. So you can use it to light up things like sort of stones that glow. You can use it to make pistons move. You can use it to make complicated machines. And you can also use it to make logic. What you're looking at here is an AND gate. If that switch and that switch are thrown, this one is powered. And you can also make an OR gate if one or the other is thrown. And in fact, actually, you can make any of these logic gates inside this very simple but sophisticated wiring system. And so if there's anyone around here that does any software or hardware design, you'll immediately recognize these things as the absolute building blocks of what computers and what software are made out of. And so to make really cool stuff, kids will gleefully learn and master incredibly arcane logic circuitry and logic statements because they can make cool things like this. So this is a little video that went viral online, made by a 16-year-old boy. His name is Oliver Brotherhood. He goes by Mumbo Jumbo on YouTube. And he likes making these doors that are really complicated. They sort of open whenever you step on those little pressure plates. Underneath the ground, there's a huge amount of circuitry driving all this stuff. This took him like days and days to do. Now, I called him up and talked to him because he's famous for making great redstone stuff. And he told me he started this when he was 16 years old, building these things. And it got him so interested in logic and the way it iterates that he started also teaching himself programming. And he ended up applying to an elite programming college in the UK. And he was accepted partly because they looked at the stuff he'd done on YouTube and were so amazed by all of his creations that they said, this kid really gets and understands this stuff. Now, you also have to do an awful lot of engineering problem solving when you're making these creations in Minecraft. Here's another little video. This is my other son, Gabriel. I asked him to make a big wall with a door in it. And it's a hidden door. You can't see it. It's just that great big wall. But you can see there's sort of a little lever down there in the corner. And we're going to go and we're going to click that lever. And you'll see, there, it sort of zippers open like that, right? It's sort of a great big wall. And there's a mechanism in behind this wall that did that. We're sort of going to wander through and just check out and see what it looks like. You go around behind and you can see, all right, so there's all the mechanisms that it took to unzip that wall. There's one for each layer. Now notice something interesting though. The first bottom 5 are bigger and these ones are smaller. They get tighter. And I asked Gabriel, so why are they like that? And he said, well, you know, I was sort of building these ones and making a mechanism, but then I realized halfway through that I could actually do it in a more compact and efficient way, and it required a smaller amount of circuitry. And now this is exactly the sort of thing you see all the time in software design and hardware design and any type of engineering where you're doing something and you realize, oh my God, there's a more efficient way to do this. I can take these 30 lines of code and do it in 5 lines of code. And so this type of sort of engineering thinking, this sort of, you know, programmatic thinking, computational thinking is stuff I saw over and over again as I was traveling around the country in the US and talking on Skype to kids around the world about what they were doing. Now, one of the things that's even weirder that I discovered when I got into Minecraft is that there's this enormous textual command culture, right? So if you want to chat with someone else you're playing with, you pull up this heads-up display, and it's pretty much like IRC, you're chatting with your friends. But there's also all these text commands you can do. If you want to do something very sophisticated and quick, you want to build a large wall not by placing bricks, you can issue a command, a text command, to bring it into being. And so kids very quickly learn these incredibly complicated object property syntax. It's almost exactly like the type of syntax you see inside modern software. And again, they're learning it not because they sat down saying, I want to learn all these skills that will empower me. They just did it because they wanted to make something cool inside the game. So there's this enormous command line syntax that's incredibly fascinating. In fact, Minecraft is so open-ended in this way that Ian Bogost, who's a game academic I know, he was once asked in an interview, you know, why is Minecraft so popular with kids? And he said, you know, I don't think it's actually a game so much as this generation's microcomputer. This is this generation's Commodore 64. So that's the first big plank of the Minecraft culture that I wanted to sort of show to you, is that computational thinking. But there's another aspect of it, which is that Minecraft is insanely complicated. I mean, I've been playing video games for 30 years, and I've rarely seen anything this complex. If you want to build something, if you want to make a block, you sort of put a bunch of blocks together and you can make something new. And so there's all these recipes. Take 2 sticks, put them together, put coal on the top, and you have a torch, you know? If you take some spider silk, harvested from a spider and some stones, sticks, you can make yourself a bow. So there are hundreds and hundreds, possibly thousands of these combos, none of which are spec'd out anywhere inside the game. You just have to discover them. And so what starts happening is that to learn how to play the game, you have to start off doing information sharing right off the bat. You have to talk to other kids. You have to go online and look at wikis and guides like this that have been put together by people. In fact, actually, within a few years of Minecraft coming out, there was a wiki that is sprawling and huge. It's like basically the Wikipedia for teenagers today, because it's where you go to figure out stuff inside Minecraft. The page devoted to horses is 3,900 words alone, and there are tens of thousands of such pages that have all been lovingly put together in this information sharing culture. The thing you learn when you play Minecraft is that you basically have to be open source. You have to share information. You have to get it from other people. Anything worth doing takes research and hard work. You have to go to the library, as Hermione said in the Harry Potter stories. And this is really what participatory culture looks like, which is a point that Henry Jenkins frequently makes. Any culture that's open encourages that type of knowledge sharing, encourages that great spirit of the hacker ethic. So that's the first kind of, or first big culture of Minecraft is a computational thinking. The second big part is that information sharing. And the third one is not one that I expected at all, but was explained to me by Mimi Ito. She's a researcher out in California, and she's famous for having researched a lot of stuff about the way kids use technology. And about a year or two ago, she started a Minecraft camp where you can go online if you're a kid from anywhere in the world, and they all get together, and they play together, and they learn how to make things together. And one of the things she told me is that you quickly discover that Minecraft is incredibly buggy. It is just a crashy, leaky, kludgy piece of software. You're in the middle of making something, and it crashes. You're trying to show something off to your friend, and it crashes. You're trying to do something. This is the blue screen of death for the Minecraft generation, basically. This is what haunts their nightmares the same way the blue screen of death haunted people in the 1990s with Microsoft. But the weird thing that she told me is that the kids become incredibly resilient about this. If something goes wrong in one of these glossy ecosystems, like the Apple ecosystem, people and kids always complain, oh, why doesn't Apple fix this? They're very helpless. They don't feel empowered at all. Why doesn't the person, the overlord, fix this problem for me? But when something goes wrong with Minecraft, they just roll up their sleeves and fix it because they have a sense that they can actually do it because it's an open system. So there's a sense of empowerment with this technology that doesn't obtain in the very glossy world of apps that everyone else has built. So that's a really interesting part of the Minecraft culture. And the very last one that I'm going to throw out here is one that is complicated and took me a long time to understand the dimensions of. And that's the social nature of this software. You know, people often see a kid sitting there playing Minecraft on their phone or on their laptop or on their tablet, and it looks kind of isolating because they're just sitting there by themselves. But half the time, they're actually online with a bunch of other kids playing. And that's because of a peculiar quirk of the Minecraft software, which is that every iteration of it, whether it's on a phone or on a tablet or on a PC, it can also act as a server. You can open up your world and share it with other folks. So if I, was sitting here playing Minecraft on my phone and you came into my living room and you had a phone, I could just open it up and we could start playing together inside my phone. We could start building things together. And if you want to spend a couple dollars, you can have your own server rented where you invite all your friends in. And frequently, I would see this sort of activity where kids are just getting together and playing. Now, this is a little video. This is from a YouTube group. They call themselves Team Sidearm. And this is exactly what it looks like for an enormous amount of young people today. This is how they're socializing. They get home from school. They fire up their version of Minecraft. They invite all their other friends in from around town. And they just build stuff together. And they horse around together. And so in some respects, this is looking like what social software is to this generation of kids. It's not just talking, it's doing. It's doing things collaboratively and together. And in fact, actually, I would frequently, while I was reporting that story, I would hang out with kids who would get home from school and they'd fire up their server, and one by one, I'd see other kids winking in from around the city and around the globe, friends of theirs, to play together. Now, the thing about collaboratively being in a 3D environment and building stuff is that you can also destroy stuff. There's a lot of TNT inside Minecraft. It's a lot of fun to blow stuff up. This is another couple of popular YouTubers. They're called Popular MMOs. And they're just sort of showing here what it's like to blow something up. You put a lot of TNT and TNT on it. You ignite it. Count to 3, and there we go. It blows up real good. In fact, I think everything's gone except for maybe one brick left floating in the air, right? So it's fun to build things. It's fun to destroy things. It's kind of fun to destroy things your friends have built, to play a prank on them, right? And so very frequently, kids have fun wrecking other people's stuff. That's what griefing and trolling looks like in Minecraft. It's not just calling each other names, although that happens too. It's going in and actually destroying stuff that they made. So this becomes very interesting because kids have to sort of deal now with a type of trolling that can be quite aggressive and can be quite strange. And I would often find, when I talked to them, that they would tell me a story about how, one day, they had been spending months building a world with their friends. They had 4 or 5 friends. They would all get together after school. They would build something. They would have this huge city. They show me these screenshots. And then one day, one of their friends would accidentally give out the login information to another kid from another school, who would sneak in under cover of darkness and just blow everything up. And the next morning, they would show up, and there's just a crater, a smoking crater, where their 3-month-long city used to be, right? And so I would say, well, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with trolling and griefing inside these worlds? Well, the interesting thing about Minecraft is because all of these servers are run by the kids themselves. They have the ability to figure out how to deal with it. If they want to block or ban someone, they can. But they also often just talk about it a lot. They sit down, either online or face-to-face, with all the people who were got in this sort of collision, and they talk about how they're going to deal with this. What is their constitution going to be for this world? Are we going to allow each other to blow things up only after it's been around for a couple of days and everyone's seen it and they've taken screenshots? Are we not going to allow that at all? They also deploy software. You can deploy plugins that will impose sort of a vampire logic. I can make my house, and you can't touch it or change it unless I let you to, unless I invite you in. And so they're effectively creating laws of the land. And they do this incredibly complicated social hacking out. I would watch these kids say, all right, we're going to play a game of capture the flag inside this world. And they would talk for 30 minutes about the rules of the game that they would play for 5 minutes. The self-governance talk is 5 or 6 times longer than the actual activity, and I began to realize the self-governance talk was the activity. That was what they were actually enjoying doing. When they had command of their own world, they actually enjoyed figuring out how to get along inside it. Now, Elinor Ostrom, 2009 Nobel laureate, she won her Nobel Prize for observing the fact that when people are left alone to their own devices in environments or economies that they more or less control, they tend to be reasonably good 9 times out of 10 at figuring out how to deal with conflict. It might take them a little while, but they do eventually get to that point. Seth Frey is a young academic who is an admirer and follower of Elinor Ostrom, and he's also spent time studying thousands and thousands of kids' behavior online. And he was the first one that pointed this out to me and said, I'm amazed how often they figure this stuff out, particularly on servers where it's like 90% 14-year-old boys who are, as he says, the worst people on the planet, right? And yet they solve the tragedy of the commons over and over again because they have the ability to change things themselves. And that's really the key thing. They have control over their environments. Unlike in Twitter or Facebook or somewhere else, when you see trolling and griefing, you constantly see people trying to appeal to Twitter or Facebook. Can you fix this? Can you change that? It's that same helpless relationship to the software. In this situation, the kids have control over their own environment, and they have a sense of empowerment, and they have a tinkerer's mindset, so they get around to solving it themselves. In one sense, Minecraft is actually almost more a piece of social software than it is a game, because it's so central to the way a lot of kids hang out. And in some respects, I think they may decide over time that it's actually superior to the social software that we adults have been using for 10 years. I sometimes talk to these 12 or 13-year-old kids who've done this managing of griefing and trolling, and they've figured stuff out, and they've worked out the social compact, and they've worked out the software that they themselves run on their world. And I think there is no way that they are going to accept what Twitter or Facebook or companies like that throw at them 10 years later when they're adults. They may decide that the future of social networking is actually a place where they are much more empowered to make the decisions themselves, and there is no corporate overlord running things. Now, I'm going to leave you with a couple other top-down observations that I've had from looking at all these kids and what this game, what this software, what this environment has done to them. Sometimes I think you should keep your eye on the interns that are going to be coming around in the next 5 years, because I suspect they might have extremely sophisticated design thinking. Because again, this is a generation of kids that grew up thinking that there's nothing more fun than designing incredibly complicated 3D environments and working with circuitry to make them do interesting things. So this is going to be a bunch of kids that are probably extremely interested in the design thinking that we're going to need a lot more of as software eats the world. I think it may also be that they're pretty good at collaboration, because in most cases I saw when you see something really big being built, it's often being built by a team of people who are all hanging out and doing things. In fact, there's a term for it. They're called build teams. And everyone figures out what their role is, and everyone gets it done, and they divide it up. And I guess it's a little bit like sort of raid parties on old World of Warcraft games, except in this case, they actually have to make something. They're building something. They're doing something constructive. That's really exciting to watch. And the last sort of big lesson that came out of all this research is something that I think is a consistent problem we have when we're trying to spot cultural change, when we're trying to figure out where the ball is moving, and that's that we should always, always pay attention to what's happening at the grassroots. Because just like with the Commodore 64, which everyone thought was just this silly little box, none of the parents and authorities understood what was happening. What was happening was that a generation of kids were figuring out that they could make software, that they could be empowered to do this stuff, that they could be the tinkerers and the breakers and the makers and the hackers. The same type of thing is happening right now. Minecraft has become this enormous experience for middle schoolers and high school kids. It's given them a taste of being able to roll back the hood of the machine and see things and change them and do interesting things in a way that nothing else in their life allows them to do. And so it's much more than a game. It's probably something closer to their computer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. I would like to warn you right now that we're going to have questions from the audience, and I know that you might need some time to prepare mentally for this shocking ask. So start preparing for that, and I'll ask some questions that I have.
Sure. Yeah, okay.
So I'm 38, and when I was, and I'm a total geek, obviously, and when I was a kid, it was almost like there were these like base disciplines.
Yes.
You know, almost like hip hop has all of these different disciplines. Like geekdom at that time
That's
had,
right.
You were interested in comics, you were playing RPGs,
Right.
you knew how to code. That was just something that was
Sure, yeah.
there was a requirement, and that was thrust upon you in
Right.
your social environment. And then that disappeared, and now we start to have things like this.
Yeah.
But did we lose a generation in between?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, my sense is kids are inventive and smart and good at finding a weird place that we were not paying attention to. And it may simply be there was something going on that we didn't know, we didn't realize. I think actually probably, you know, in some respects, online culture, the early online culture, the weird, creaky, ugly, you know, GeoCities online culture was where a lot of that was starting to happen around that time. Because whenever I talk to people who were sort of in between the Commodore 64 generation and the modern generation, they will all zero in on that. Like they all, partly because, again, it was all secret and below the surface and unobserved by authority figures. This is one of the key things, right? When you're a teenager and you want to do something creative and weird, you do not want your parents to know about it. You do not want your teachers to know about it. You do not want anyone in authority to know about it. And no one was paying attention to those weird, creepy sites, right? So I sometimes I'm talking to these programmers now, and I'm saying, how did you learn this? And if they're in their 20s, sometimes they discovered they could run a little weird business in their bedroom on these, like someone started, you know, designing websites for other people, you know, very simple things. Someone started, you know, selling stuff on eBay. They had these weird online cultures that, you know, I'd ask, do your parents know about this stuff? No, they had no idea this was going on. So I think anywhere, one of the reasons why you may not have heard about it is because they didn't want you to hear about it, right?
Of course,
you know?
yeah, I was already too old.
Exactly.
Yeah, clearly. But then I wonder, because Minecraft is everywhere, so those were kind of the point of those first two generations, let's call them that, were that they were a little bit hidden, and that they were a little bit, that there was some kind of group identity that comes from being slightly marginal, let's just say kindly about myself. Now, this is a mainstream thing. Of course, it's very useful to have, for a lot of kids to have access to this, but how does that change the dynamic, do you think?
Well, you know, I think it's really good in one way. It's simply because it is more broadly spread, right? You know, when you think about, like, okay, it was great these kids had this early hacker culture in the early internet, that was still limited to any kids that could get online, which was, you know, very class dependent, right? It was mostly wealthier kids that could do that. Not always, mostly wealthier kids that could do that. One of the things that I find kind of interesting about Minecraft is it's pretty broadly spread even amongst income groups. I set out specifically to sort of figure out if this was true when I began reporting. I wanted to go around. I wanted to go into communities that were much more lower income, that have, you know, a lower penetration of broadband, to see is Minecraft in there also, and it really is, because the truth is it's become I guess they made the software originally because they wanted to run on cheap little machines. And so the upside is it runs on whatever crappy phone you've got. It runs on whatever cheap, you know, throwaway burner thing you've got. It runs on whatever old, lousy laptop you've got. And that's allowed it to spread much more widely than a lot of technologies before. It's not perfect. I mean, you still have digital divide issues. But this is one of the few software culture things I've seen that's more broadly spread.
How much do you think that this was intentional from the design team originally? Like, did they? Because it starts to feel like a Neil Stephenson novel. Like they released this reprogramming of a whole generation onto the world.
I asked them that. I asked Jens, who's the lead designer, and I said, so, you know, all this stuff, you know, that I'm seeing, you know, and certainly all this redstone, did you intend this education? He's like, no. We're just a bunch of nerds, and we made something that we wanted to play ourselves, right? You know, and I really believe them because, like, you know, no one in their right mind would put like an entire Linux bash shell inside a game and expect that would be a fun thing to do. They just did it because that's how they understood you should interact with a computer. They just threw it in there, and lo and behold, it explodes and becomes a big pinnacle of what kids find fun to do inside Minecraft.
So that actually connects a little bit to my final question. So now be prepared to raise your hands, which is, can we force kids to learn to code? Because it would seem that this would be a useful thing to teach in school still. Like,
in a way, I don't think you probably shouldn't force kids to do anything. Partly because it won't work, no,
we totally have to force them to do something.
Well, no, yeah. If you have basic education, you have to force them. But like, yeah, okay. you have to learn. They have to learn the history. They have to learn the language. They have to learn the math. They have to learn the basic stuff. Should this become? I guess what you're asking is, should this become part of formal education? I actually don't think so. In a way, I think things are much more powerful when they're left to the street and the grassroots, just to develop the way they develop. And in fact, actually, it may well be that, you know, 5 or 10 years from now, or even less, there'll be something completely different, right? I hope that whatever comes along next in youth culture, youth high-tech culture that's past this, has that same openness to it. Because I think it's that openness that's really key to allowing you to do crazy new things. You know, when you think about the way, you know, we play and we use apps, it's a lot of fun, but we're sort of very passively using them. We're not creating stuff. We're not learning anything about how to architect or tweak or understand the digital world very well. It's environments like this that let you get that sense. So, you know, for all we know, this could be over in 5 years, and I hope what comes after it is as open as this is.
So really, the education question then is, how do we provide the next step?
Right,
how do we take kids who have had this, who have this passion, and help them formalize that into something that can eventually become a career?
Yes, there are already a lot of teachers doing that, and I met and talked to a lot of them. In many cases, they would basically, you know, what they would do is they would have like after-school programs or whatnot, where they said, hey, you know, like, you're already doing this. Let's see if we can take it the next level. Let's see if we can do stuff like, they have formal programming languages that work inside Minecraft. Luau is one of them. It's used outside in the outside world, but it works really well for designing stuff inside here. I know other clubs that have worked on like server design, where they get really into the nitty-gritty of designing and tweaking servers. Now, this is where, I will say though, this is where you get much more of a digital divide problem, because this tends to be done in schools and districts that have lots of money. So you see less of this, making a bridge in environments where it's lower income. So in one sense, as a policy way, governments could think about making this as a useful bridge and putting money into that type of activity.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, I can't quite see you, but I'm sure we have some questions. We have one right there. We have some runners with microphones. We're starting here over there. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Clive. That was an amazing talk.
Thank you.
Actually turned me in from rather negative to quite positive about Minecraft as an educational tool. But my question is really, do you think that the like media spotlight culture we have today of like everybody's talking about Minecraft is really ruining the whole underground phenomenon? Because like I was a C64 coder, and like I loved it because it was not like my parents were like, oh great, you're sitting coding C64 again, that's great.
I was keenly aware that when I was writing my story for the New York Times Magazine that I might be destroying this, right? You know, because the last thing you want to do when something really cool is happening amongst young people is to say, hey adults, hey clueless olds, here's what's going on. But in this case, I'm not convinced it will, because again, there's something. One of the nice things about what kids do with Minecraft is it's very open-ended, right? You can sort of do so many different things. There's probably stuff going on now that I don't even know about, you know, since the time I researched it. I think that like it's true that there is a danger in trying to hierarchicalize cultural shifts. And so this is, in one sense, a danger I talked about in trying to rope it into schools. That's how you kill youth culture, right? You know, you put it in the schools. So your question, the answer to your question is, I don't think so, and I certainly hope not, but I admit it as a possibility.
Yes, thank you. Yes, over here. This microphone's coming right there.
So what about the coding minority, all the girls?
Yes.
Are they playing Minecraft?
So, yes.
Should they play Minecraft, and could that somehow bring them into the technology field, you think?
Yeah, that was a very interesting question for me, because so you look back at like things like the Commodore 64, and all the ads for it showed these, you know, little blonde white boys, sitting in front of their home computers. There was never any girls, and it wasn't that there weren't any girls in that scene back then, but they were definitely in a minority, partly because the cultural urging was all in that direction. And that's partly one of the problems we have today, right? In this case, it doesn't seem that way. I mean, I asked Microsoft for their statistics, and they said it's in the high 40s percentages for women playing it. But that also includes adult women. And they don't break it down by age. What I was interested in, let's take a look specifically at the ages where girls drop out of engineering, right? Which is like, sort of middle school to high school. I wanted to know, and that age group, what is it? My suspicion is it's probably a little lower there, but it's not perilously low. I mean, I frequently, when I put out the call, when I went to organizations, said I want to talk to kids who play Minecraft, and I worked through my own contacts, I worked through different groups, a very surprisingly large number were girls. Now, there's one difference though, which is that there is a part of Minecraft culture which is where some people will set up a large corporate server filled with these kind of games. Like maybe a capture the flag game or a build game, and you can text chat with each other. And so abuse comes in, right? And so there were definitely some girls I talked to who experienced misogynist abuse in those environments. Now, these are not servers that they control. This is like a corporate thing where you go and play. They would run their own servers and just, and have their own friends, and that worked fine. But they were aware. It was their first experience of sort of that Twitter-like experience, right? Now, it was still, to me, exciting and interesting that they had this control of their own area that they really liked. And that's one of the reasons why I began to understand and think that this decentralized networking is really something that kids like that are going to say, yeah, no, I insist on this mode of interaction, because they've learned, they do a little A/B test on their own, those girls, and they go, all right, the big open environments where no one's controlling it stuff are just a mess. And the ones where I have some autonomy are really good. So, the short answer to the question is there are way more girls involved in this than there were in the stuff back in the 80s, but you always need to keep an eye on encouraging and keeping that stuff up.
Yes, thank you. I have to say that also ties in quite interestingly with the session that was just in the bar, I think. Yes, did you have a question right here? Yes. Can we have a microphone down here?
Or maybe yell it out and we'll repeat it.
Maybe. Yeah. You can yell and if it's not very long. Is it a short question?
Mm-hmm.
This is not a very long. This is not a very short question. I'm realizing. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Okay, good one.
So do you want to recap?
The question is, given that so much online interactions are extremely highly surveilled and scooped up eagerly by spy agencies and corporations around the world, what impact might that have on the sort of hacker, maker, tinkerer, breaker culture, right? Well, the first answer is something that a lot of sociologists who I've talked to have found about youth culture, which is that youth tend to not be worried about spy agencies because they're worried about a much more present spy agency danger, which is their parents and their teachers. So they have developed unbelievably sophisticated ways of getting out of their view, and they haven't started thinking yet about the NSA or anything like that, or corporations gathering stuff. So the downside is their eye isn't on that ball. The upside is they have some really great strategies if you pay attention to them. In fact, one thing we could probably do is sit down with a bunch of teenagers, ask them, what are you doing to evade your parents? And then build that into our own security software. And I actually did wonder at some point in time whether the NSA or anyone is starting to monitor activity on, because there are tens of thousands of Minecraft servers, right? And I don't know if they're crawling activity in all these. I'm sure it's doable, right? On the other hand, the security might be pretty good. There was a story a couple of years ago where the CIA in the US was infiltrating World of Warcraft clans because they began to realize that people who they thought were insurgents were using it as an environment to coordinate attacks. I don't know whether that went any further, although it had the most delicious headline the New York Times has ever run, where an agent may be an elf.
That also makes one suspect that perhaps they've picked up some chatter about coordinating attacks that may have been about World of Warcraft.
Entirely, yeah, exactly. Yeah, show up at 9 o'clock and we're going to kill them all. That's World of Warcraft talk. That's a good question. My sense is this generation will not arrive at those concerns until they're probably in their 20s or 30s.
I think we have time for one more question. There's one right there in the back. And if you're sitting farther back, like wave with a big hand, because it's harder for me to see it. Can you put your hand up right?
Hi.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Let's do one here and then one there. It's fine. We've got time. Yes.
Talking about monitoring the Minecraft culture, did you, in your research, do any exploration of the community that watches, like YouTube videos?
Mm-hmm. Yes. The YouTube video stuff is incredibly interesting. So it turns out right now that the second most searched for term on all of YouTube is Minecraft. The first one is music. The second one is Minecraft. It is just a ridiculous amount of activity. And it turns out that I think what's really interesting about Minecraft activity is that this is a type of hacking that you need to see how it's done to learn it. So what it's become is a really interesting plank of emerging modern visual culture. A generation of kids who basically realized that there are certain things that are very hard to talk about in text, but easy to do in video. And they become very fluent in recording and talking and using video for a rhetorical purpose, right? And this is incredibly interesting because right now, for the last 5,000 years, text has been our dominant mode of communication. And it's really only been the last 10 years that video has begun to emerge as a mode for everyday rhetoric. But up until now, it's still been basically people talking into cameras. The thing that's interesting about the YouTube culture with Minecraft is they're learning how to sort of say, right, how do I build this thing? How do we do this complicated thing? How do we show this to someone else? And I find that quite interesting.
They learn teaching skills. They
learn
communication skills.
They learn a type of rhetorical skill that isn't really taught in schools yet, which is how do you use video to communicate something complicated in a new way? That's interesting.
Super interesting. We had a question about halfway up. Yeah, wave your hand around. There we are. Yes. Yes, please.
Hello. You've talked about self-governance within those groups.
Yes.
Have you seen this spill into the real world?
Oh, yeah.
Or
really
is that not a valid question?
No, it's a great question that I don't have any answer for. That's an amazing question, but I don't know whether, like, what you're asking is, have the skills they've learned in managing online activity and resolving conflict, has that spilled into the outside world? Are they better at it on the playground, in the lunchroom, amongst their friends? I have no idea. I'd love to see. Do we have any PhD people in here looking for a PhD thesis? Right? That would be a great PhD thesis. A great question. I don't know the answer.
Tricia, obviously, who talked this morning, is a digital ethnographer. So, like, digital ethnography is a field we need more. We need better answers. I think, I suppose, sociologists and anthropologists should be getting into this as well. So interesting. I think I would like for us to say thank you to Clive. Mm-hmm. And but before we do that, I would like us to do an extra applause for two people who contributed quite a lot to this presentation, and they're sitting right here, Zev and Gabriel.
My children,
thanks, you guys.
Throwing down the Minecraft videos in my presentation.
Thank you guys for teaching your dad so many interesting things that he can then tell us. And dear friends, Clive Thompson.
Thank you very much.